fellow pilgrims, our story begins with a brief history of the Protestant cult-like sect, Plymouth Bretheranism. And here in this sneak preview of the Sinner's Timepiece of Torture, I waive my usual video introductory and closing speeches, for none that I can think of measure up to this true horror, which speaks for itself. John Nelson Darby, 1800 to 1882, a curate in County Wicklow, Ireland, stood as a central figure among several groups of Christians who met informally in Dublin during the years 1827 and 1828, and thus the Christian Brethren movement began. In December of 1831, Darby and two of his close associates then held their first meeting in Plymouth, England. The movement soon spread throughout the United Kingdom. They became known as the Brethren from Plymouth and were soon simply called Plymouth Brethren. Meetings continued to spread, springing up throughout Europe's mainland as well as in Australia and New Zealand, largely under Darby's hand. The Plymouth Brethren came to the United States in the mid-19th century, and here's where they come of interest to our present story, the Sinner's Timepiece of Torture, and where I can then set forth that timepiece's horrid involvement in my own personal life ever since my tender age of 19 years. Stating the case in brief, one Hans Maximilian Gartner, born in Germany in 1860, at the age of 20, met Darby during Darby's evangelistic achievements there, and he quickly attained Darby's favor as a promising addition to the then growing Plymouth Brethren mission in America. Darby was now 80 years old and could not make the journey himself, and so he commissioned the young Hans to emigrate to Pennsylvania's 2-century-old Quaker community in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, a name which harkens back to the early days of the church, known as the Philadelphia era of the church, during which the brothers in the name of God concept initially flourished, and which stands to this day as a byword in Plymouth Bretheranism. There, Hans were to initiate a Plymouth Brethren stronghold. Hans did so, and he adopted the English spelling of the surname, Gartner, the English spelling being G-A-R-D rather than T-N-E-R. He married, and the young couple gave birth to a son, John Gardner, who they named John after their beloved brother in God, John Darby. It turns out that John Gardner was my father's uncle, and during my early childhood, I was taken by my parents to his home in the Philadelphia area, specifically the region called the Meeting at Plymouth, incorporated by the early Quakers. You can find it on a map. I felt afraid of Uncle John because each time we approached his home, my mother would warn me to be on my best Christian behavior, and that it would be best if I were to just play outside during the entire visit, while my father and Uncle John conferred in private over the matters of Bible prophecy, salvation, the rapture, evangelism, and dispensationalism. Uncle John would not tolerate even the slightest degree of insolence or unchristian behavior from any Plymouth Brethren child, and as you might by now assume, I was one of them. And I also exhibited a knack for raising questions about our beliefs and our corresponding way of life that, as my mother put it, were not exemplary of a good Christian boy. And we did not want Uncle John to turn us out of the meeting. And and consequently the whole of Plymouth Brethren, shun us for life, No. So I would go ahead and just play outside by myself. Besides, children in general were to be seen and not heard. My mother would keep a close eye on me through the kitchen window. It also turns out that Uncle John held a secret possession, which his father Hans had acquired from Darby to keep Hans on track in America. Before Uncle John's earthly departure to paradise, he passed on the thing to my own father. Nobody else in the family was ever told about it, let alone shown it. The sinner's timepiece of torture was a clock, the physical origin of which my father had never learned. I say the physical origin of which because I later discovered that it was merely the physical representation of an old astral hell, which, although in his final days my father destroyed the physical clock, this astral hell continues to torture a small group of the damned to this day. I lived in the physical presence of the awful clock, and I have seen the astral hell which it represented in action. And this story, the sinner's timepiece of torture, is the story of both. I myself am now getting up in years, and it is time for me to bring the treacherous darkness of the matter into the cold, hard light of day. Wicked? Yes. Dreadful? Yes. Real? Oh, yes. Stick around for the full report. Coming soon to your favorite horror channel. Tunnel of Dark Narrations.